Today's episode is brought to you by Positively Productive Systems, whose mission is to be the antidote to your stress and to provide compassionate productivity resources and coaching that help you heal and achieve. Be sure to check out both free and paid resources at positivelyproductive.com/resources.
We're challenged to find areas that are not negatively impacted when we're deprived of a certain amount of sleep that we need. So what that can look like is cardiovascular health gets impacted. Our mental health gets impacted, seeing a lot of in the news more recently, looking at correlations between dementia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, all of these states that previously we might not have thought that there were certain things that we could do preventatively, and looking at this possibility that sleep could be one of those things. But also from the mental health perspective, like you were speaking to, how things can just feel so much heavier, difficulty, this is looking at different studies of, say, like conflict resolution or the ability to solve simple sort of tasks. There might be more errors, hormonal balances throughout for both men and women, disruption in our cycle if we're of menstruating age, aggravation around the process of menopause and then post-menopause. Just the list goes on and on of so many areas that it impacts.
You're listening to the Positively Living podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Zawrotny, founder of Positively Productive Systems and a coach certified in time and stress management, helping clients make space for what matters most in their lives. Join me each episode and we'll talk about decluttering, stress management, habits, personalized productivity, gratitude, and so much more. I understand the overwhelm of life because I'm a wife, mom to kids and cats, and a former caregiver. I'm here to help you choose what's right for you so you can do less, live more, and breathe easier. Sound good? Let's get to it. Today's episode is going to be a snooze fest, but not in the way you think it is. We're talking about one of my favorite topics with an incredible expert, and it is actually my goal to put you to sleep. After the episode, do you struggle to get to sleep? Have time to sleep? Sleep well when you go to sleep? It's one of the things we tend to forgo when we're stressed and overwhelmed with to-dos, yet one of the things we need the most for our overall well-being. The statistics back me up on this. 70 million people in the U.S. have sleep disorders, and upwards of 30% of the worldwide population suffers from insomnia, with women being 40% more likely to have it. Driving when sleep deprived is as dangerous as driving under the influence. Worse than that, sleep deprivation is linked to a long list of health conditions and can actually increase the risk of developing diseases like Alzheimer's. That's the not so good news. What's the good news? We can do something about it. And today's guest is helping us with that. Today, I welcome Mollie McGlocklin to the Positively Living podcast. Mollie is the creator of Sleep is a Skill and the host of the Sleep is a Skill podcast. Sleep is a Skill is a company that optimizes people's sleep through a unique blend of technology, accountability, and behavioral change. After navigating insomnia while traveling internationally, she created what she couldn't find, a place to go to learn the skill set of sleep. With a background in behavioral change from the nonverbal group, she became fascinated with chronobiology and its practical application to sleep and our overall experience of life. In our conversation today, Mollie shares science-backed details on what happens during sleep and the huge list of issues linked to lack of proper sleep relating to cardiovascular, brain, and hormonal health. Getting good sleep is one of the best things we can do to bump up our overall health and our focus, which links to productivity. Mollie explains how our circadian rhythm works and how we can leverage that to cue better sleep. She also shares resources and diagnostic tools that can help you assess the quality and details of your sleep and other health markers. Some of the approaches may sound familiar, but Mollie includes so many details that I haven't heard before, and I'm excited to share them with you. Welcome, Mollie McGlocklin, to the Positively Living podcast. Today, we're talking about one of my favorite topics, and you are definitely one of my favorite people. Your energy and your intention for helping others, especially with this particular topic, is inspiring to me, and I'm excited to get into it.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me and for saying that. And you really live your brand. Every interaction I have with you is positive and positively positive. So I'm really happy to be here today.
I'd love it if you'd start with just who you are, who you help, what makes you light up.
Oh, I like that question. Okay. Yes. So, who I am is now the creator of Sleep is a Skill. We aim to help people optimize their sleep through technology, accountability, behavioral change. And that all came about because of my own issues with my own sleep. And what that looked like was basically for many years having all kinds of labels around my sleep. It was, I'm a bad sleeper. I'm a night owl. I'm a short sleeper. It's in my genes, just sort of like saying these labels, and just had it really that it was fixed though. Like it was just sort of how it was for me. And that's going to stay like that. And, nothing to really do about it because that's innate almost. And it wasn't until I went through a period of insomnia while traveling internationally. And I was really out of just tons of entrepreneurial stress. I was living in the middle of Manhattan, feeling like, so much responsibility and got employees and people, depending on you, and there's bills to pay and all of the things, and just stress to the max. And my experience was I couldn't sleep. And so out of that, it went through this period of, well, what are my options here? And kept trying everything and anything. And at one of my lowest points, went to the doctors in Croatia with Google Translate, and I was like, I can't sleep, help. And left with their version of Ambien. And in that moment was like, okay, is this the future for me? Am I going to be taking something consistently to be able to do something that you would think would be so primal? And out of that, it spurred sort of this quest to get this handled in hopefully a natural way so that you're not, dependent. And so through that, tested all kinds of things, was able to restore my sleep and not only bring it back to how it was, which as I shared wasn't that great, but brought it back to now. And from that place, improved it, moving into the realm of really optimizing my sleep and starting to have like quantifiable data around really sleep that I never thought was possible for myself consistently. And it just changed my whole life. Couldn't stop talking about it. Started working with people organically, just, because it was so just a paradigm shift in my life. So wanted to bring that to others. And then it started moving and growing into now we have online courses, we have weekly newsletters. We're at 56 something weekly newsletters. We aim to have the most, obsessive sleep newsletter on the planet. Then we've got weekly podcasts. So we aim to really deliver information for people consistently to help make a difference with their sleep. And, lots of new things kind of coming and evolving. And that's sort of the background on how that all became to be.
So you just dove into the research and you needed to because you were absolutely desperate at that point. And with that, the pendulum swung the other way in the best way possible for you.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I'm oddly very, very grateful for that period when I was going through it. I thought there was no room for gratitude. And yet it turns out that it was very much so an important wake up call for me because clearly I wasn't listening to some of the signs that I wasn't handling my life and my stress well. There was lots of signs looking back on it. I was getting sick more and more often. I had the beginnings of an ulcer. I'd gotten shingles. I'd gotten all these things that the body is really saying something's got to give. And it wasn't until that period of, sleep and just really, if anyone's experienced one or two nights of, sleep deprivation or the inability to sleep, and then you just pair that night after night after night, I mean, you start to look at sleep and the importance of it in a whole new way. And now to get to see that there are so many things that we can do, there's a whole arsenal of tools that we can have to really keep our sleep consistently on track, on course, use it as kind of a barometer for workability in our life. And if it's starting to dip, like, okay, there might be some things that we need to shift and adjust and deal with. And so I'm really, really grateful for that in the long run.
I love that. I love the tip to gratitude there. And and to be able to see that option. But there is such hope in that. And it excites me because, we talk about growth mindset and, looking at this is something that, I'm all about. It's like, what can you do? What are you able to? It's, you may be limited here, but what else is there? And you came from a position where I think there was sort of this acceptance of, well, that's just how it is. And you didn't let that stop you. And now you've uncovered this world of, oh, we have options. And that's exciting.
Yes, it's really exciting. And the naming of the company was intentional of sleep is a skill and really leaning into this element of versus, how I had been of that fixed state of like, well, you're either a good sleeper or you're a bad sleeper. It's either you got it, you don't. And yet this learnable element and this idea that even no matter where we might be in our sleep, so no matter where people, if they're listening and they say, well, my sleep's okay, or no, my sleep's horrible, or whatever they might, meaning or way that they might ascribe how it's doing or how it's going, that there is always a next step that we can get to around it in a functional way, in an improvement based way.
I love that. And I know from a personal side of things, when I was a caregiver and I was also, dealing with an infant and a toddler, I was in huge sleep deprivation mode and it was brutal and it exacerbated everything else that I went through. And it was amazing how when life opened up a bit more that I could get more sleep, how that shifted everything about what I did, it just my outlook in general. And I've always felt like I needed more sleep than others, but for some reason, I don't know, there's a stigma about sleep and all that. And we will get to that. But the first thing I would love to do, and you've done the research now, talk to us a bit about sleep. We talk about it, but what is it? What's happening? And why do we care about getting that skill and giving ourselves the opportunity to sleep and sleep well?
Yeah, good question. Well, sleep at its most basic is this biological function that has, stood the test of time in a Darwinian sense. We've all evolved in all these different ways, and yet sleep still keeps sticking around. And it's something that if it could be weeded out, it most likely would be because it's a period of such a dense period of time each night that we're going through that we're vulnerable to all kinds of different possibilities. And yet it seems to be so part and parcel and it's not budging from our evolution. So from that state, what we're finding is that we're challenged to find areas that are not negatively impacted when when we're deprived of a certain amount of sleep that we need. So what that can look like is cardiovascular health gets impacted. Our mental health gets impacted, seeing a lot of in the news more recently, looking at correlations between dementia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, all of these states that previously we might not have thought that there were certain things that we could do preventatively, and looking at this possibility that sleep could be one of those things. But also from the mental health perspective, like you were speaking to, how things can just feel so much heavier, difficulty, this is looking at different studies of say like conflict resolution or the ability to solve simple sort of tasks. There might be more errors, hormonal balances throughout for both men and women, disruption in our cycle if we're of menstruating age, aggravation around the process of menopause and then postmenopause, just the list goes on of so many areas that it impacts negatively. And then on the flip side, when you are getting that consistent and hopefully great sleep, then that can positively impact those things. And we're not even speaking to the nuances of, even your waistline and insulin levels and glucose and all the effort that we might be doing at the gym to build muscles, cut fat, the ability to actually have those stick and maintain and get the max benefit of that. Part of the process has to occur during sleep. So there's a lot that we could speak to of the benefits and the costs of not sleeping, but even at this most brute basic element, all cause mortality goes up in alignment with sleep deprivation, continued and chronic sleep deprivation. So, when we look at the costs, they are pretty high there.
Wow. Okay. So we'll summarize and say it affects everything.
Yes, pretty much. Exactly. And really making this statement that it's starting to kind of take hold more in recent years, but even a few years back, it would be much more controversial to really say that no, sleep really deserves the most foundational element of our health and well-being, of that kind of pyramid of what it is to have a healthy life, that the sleeping at the most important foundation by which then you can place the block of nutrition and exercise and other, self-care elements of things. But for so long, it was that forgotten platform.
Yeah. And for some reason, I think not only the forgotten one, but the one that was so quick to be off the list, right?
Yeah.
Well, just stay up, pull an all nighter, push through, push, push, push. And as you know, from the productivity standpoint, I'm like, no, we are redefining this now. Back up. And I love how you use the word optimize. I love that so much, because how are we going to optimize everything that we do in life? Well, one of the first ways is to optimize sleep and prioritize sleep. I'm fascinated by this idea of like menopause, for example, being connected, because so often in stages like that, people mention not sleeping as well. So I feel like there might be a chicken and egg thing going on, but that's a bit like off our topic this time. We may just have to
Yeah.
do this again, because there's so much to it. But you've given a phenomenal list of correlated issues that what I love is that sleep can be a simple solution to fighting the good fight against those things. I'm not saying that it would necessarily be the answer. It's like when you say, well, what can I do? One of those things is prioritize sleep.
Yes, absolutely. The impact that can make on all other things that you might be trying to do. Because so many of us have the best of intentions. New Year's comes around and we get the gym membership. We maybe sign up for a nutritionist. We do these things. And especially in the news now with the importance of immune health and all these different preventative elements that we can lean into. And yet many of our actions or efforts can be thwarted if we aren't bringing this in alignment. It has to be in that conversation. And to your point, in the past, it would just be the thing that would actually be like kind of shouted from the rooftops, the cutting of these things, go to bed later, wake up earlier, that's in a certain ethos. So we're looking to really shift that.
Yeah. And what is it that, I don't even know if this is necessarily answerable, that makes it, I guess, seem like such a weakness or such an option? What's the perception that's happening? Have you noticed?
Oh, as far as the narrative, sure.
Yeah.
That narrative is definitely beginning to shift. I think that was, certainly part of that element of the skill set. So if we aren't educated and aren't aware of what some of the fallout can be when we're not getting some of this sleep, absolutely there is that human mechanism. And we know that there are possibilities in certain periods of life where, like you were speaking to, when you're a caregiver, when a lot of things are demanded of you, we can see that there can be the possibility of, during pockets of our life, of experiencing less sleep. So we might point to that and say, well, okay, lean into what you've done 4 hours before, do it again. Like that would actually be the empowered thing to do. And that was a certain perspective. And yet now we're starting to see and question that. So we're seeing so much more of the data coming out, studies coming out, wearable data, seeing impacts on heart rate, respiratory rate, HRV, body temperature, glucose rates, insulin, all of these things that are really measurable in real time and how much they're affected by this area of sleep.
I love that. So now that it's not so much the narrative, but the science is shifting the narrative for us, which I absolutely love, because that's measurable, it's provable. So given that, I would tend to tie it back to something that I rail against. And in, one of my episodes, I actually call it freedom from the hustle. It's this hustle culture, right?
Yeah, sure.
So when we are being encouraged to push, 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 I think that pushes us toward, well, okay, there's only so much time in the day and I'm pushing, 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 as opposed to backing up, streamlining, simplifying, being more efficient. What can give? Well, sleep can give, but that's actually pushing you further toward the potential for burnout.
Yes, exactly. And, once we get towards some of that burnout, then we might have to do a little bit more work than we would have had to do if we caught it earlier, kind of backstream. So as far as that, when our hormones are out of alignment, kind of unbalanced, and we have to go back and deal with some of that fallout. It can just take more and more time, more suffering. So we're looking to see how we can shift that beforehand, get that kind of information and word out, and just beginning to bring in some of these things that people can do now to make a difference with their sleep.
Right. And along those lines, now that we're saying, okay, this does need to be a priority and I do need to learn this skill. Okay. Then there's another, I guess, side connection that I'd love to pull in here that does touch upon productivity. I love to talk to people about their chronotypes and their what they know about their circadian rhythm and how they work best. I'm a little over this whole get a morning routine and get up early and have the morning routine obsession when that might not be right for everyone. So can you tell us a bit more about, understanding that rhythm, what it is, why it's essential for all the things we're talking about?
Yes. Okay. So our circadian rhythm becomes a really important part of this conversation. And I think it's what it is basically it's a 24-hour period. It's the rotation of the earth around the sun. And from that place, what we're looking to understand is, okay, we have this 24-hour rhythm. We've got this spectrum, and its circadian rhythm can exist on either the strong side of that spectrum or the weak side of the spectrum. From that, we can either adjust it accordingly. And the average person in the West is often, you could argue, is likely on the weaker side of that circadian rhythm. So from that place, we're looking to see what are some of the things that actually help inform these rhythms of what time it is and what they need to be doing when. So there are a set number of things that help entrain, it's called. So circadian rhythm entrainment, to entrain that rhythm to be stronger and more automatic and be like the type of person that maybe they wake up at a certain point every morning and they're like the friend that you might go out with or whatever. And yet they're still always going to wake up at the exact same time. And we're actually looking to train for more of that, even though they might rail against that at certain points. We're looking to facilitate that because it brings that automaticity, and also in alignment with getting up at around the same time. We're training for getting tired at around the same time, but certain routines and things that would cue all of this automaticity. So quick things that go into that. One is overarching of that regularity. So bringing in that regularity of consistent bedtime and wake times, but really 7 days a week is one of the most important call outs. And that many of us might think, well, I'm largely doing it, but then, oh, right, on Thursday or Friday or Saturday or whatever, I go off. So what we're trying to do is bring that back in alignment, having basically on either side, plus or minus 30 minutes of that regularity. But so once we've got that as sort of the bookends of, what time we're going to fall asleep, what time we're going to wake up largely, then from that place, what we're looking to do is entrain these consistent cues. So most important cue is light for this mechanism. So what we want to do is first thing in the morning, whatever your time of morning is for you, fits for you. Some shift workers might have obviously different schedules, but so whatever the preordained morning equals, then you want to get your first shot of bright light as soon as possible upon waking. So if you get nothing else out of what I'm saying, while people are listening, then that would be one of my most important points is that helps regulate your master clock. The master clock is known as the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And so it's connected directly behind your eyes. So that connection to the light hitting the eyes is that most important element. So this needs to be outside without sunglasses in order for that kind of full effect to happen. Because if you're getting it from behind a window, there's certain studies that look at it taking an average of 50 to 100 times longer to reset that master clock because you're not getting that full spectrum light. So that's one of the biggest behavioral changes that we can make. Even if you're getting a few minutes outside every morning, that can make a difference. It doesn't have to be fancy. You could even just be standing outside your, door frame, just sort of like, even if you need to bring the coffee or whatever you need to do, but just kind of making that new routine happen. And then if you can down the road, extend the amount of time that you're getting it with asterisks that where you live geographically, you might need to be out a little bit longer because if you're in the northern latitude locations, especially in October into the spring, then many of us are at risk for lower levels of vitamin D in those locations. So the part of the element is actually just staying outside a bit longer when that sun is stretched further on the horizon. So you're going to become a little bit of a light connoisseur in order to improve your sleep if you really want to get into the skill set. So that's the first one. And you're getting as much bright light as possible throughout the course of the day. The flip side of light is also darkness. So we need to cultivate more and more darkness in the evening, since melatonin is known as the hormone of darkness. So in order to have that get to the levels that we want it to get to, it needs that presence of darkness. So shifting our environment, not just our bed, but out into the living room or wherever your living space might be leading up into the hours of bed, making sure that's as dark as possible. And really, we had an anthropologist on the podcast that spoke about the candlelight challenge, and even just taking 2 weeks where post sunset, you only light your space with just candlelight, and seeing the difference that can make for your sleep, but from a measurable element, not just like, oh, that's nice, like a little mood lighting, but like actually shifting your biology. That light darkness would be the first ones. And I can also share additional ones as well.
Yeah, that's awesome, because we've naturally gone into the list of, well, walking away today, we're in it to win it. Sleep is definitely what we want to prioritize. What can we do? And you've just given two fabulous ones and details about it that, like, I didn't even think about. Like, I understand this idea of waking up in the morning and getting bright light. And as you're describing it about the possibility of maybe like standing in the doorway, I'm thinking about the wintertime in New York.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, that might be a little bit of a challenge, but fair enough. The darkness in the evening, the candlelight idea, I'll tell you a great example of like how we experience this naturally is we go camping every summer in Lake George. And that is so much about the natural light that's happening. The sun comes out, you're in the tent, you don't have lights going on. We do have some lanterns in the evening to extend, and be able to like not hurt ourselves around the table and, get food or things like that. But really it's campfire and it's natural light. And we kind of just go with the flow in terms of when we're going to bed. And it's always interesting to see what kind of rhythm happens there. And I think that's kind of a great example, like a visual for me, especially, of how this would work and what kind of impact it would have on you to do it that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's there's a book called Chasing the Sun. And that book actually looks at some of the effects of just purely, if you were to look at nothing else, of the effects of your sleep as it compares to the sun and its relationship to the sun, then that would be an interesting book to look into. They'll even reference certain studies. There's a fairly well-known one in University of Colorado that took basically students out that had put themselves in the category of having difficulty with sleep. They put themselves into the sort of night owl category, and they brought them camping for an extended period of time. And the only, light source that they had was that natural light source and that natural rhythm. And within a relatively short period of time, they started moving back the time that they were falling asleep to be much more in alignment with those rhythms. So I know you mentioned the chronotypes, so that can be an important element for us to think about with the chronotypes, because there's this theory that, so like for me, I used to identify as like not only a night owl, but an extreme night owl. Like I am going to bed late, and at certain points, like as the sun is rising, I'm going to sleep, like some extremeness, right? And one of the things we can find is that there can be some benefits to moving more in alignment with those rhythms of nature where possible. Now, of course, there might be variance. There might be more tendency for us to go to bed much earlier on that one side of that rhythm, so certainly it's a buffer space, but I think more and more it's gotten a bit more extreme. And the thinking that when we say like night owl, that it might be normal for, oh yeah, I go to bed at 1, 2, 3, whereas the variance might not be that extreme if you start to bring in those consistent cues. And it might just be a bit more of a little bit of a shift between the morning types and the night types, but it might not be as dramatic as we might be thinking when we bring in some of these things in alignment.
Yeah, I like this idea of chasing the sun, and I can definitely see that. But there, of course, are considerations that we have. We have our
Yes.
jobs and we have our day to day, our families and our day to day responsibilities and all of that. So, given that, I would love for you to continue with some other tips. And somewhere in there, I'm also curious too about designating the sleep time, wake time, and how we can optimize that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you make a great point too, because some people are dealing with shift working and how, I mean, the totally upside down on that rhythm conversation. So, how does all that work and all the responsibilities that we might have? So, putting this through the lens of what your obligations might be on your calendar, then looking at where these things can fall. So, underneath that light darkness, first rung,
Mhm.
underneath that is temperature. So, temperature is that our bodily temperature shifts throughout the course of the day. It's at some of its highest throughout the daytime period, and then really markedly drops in the evening hours before sleep, and kind of can cue that it's time for sleep when our body temperature starts to drop, and it goes to 2 to 3 degrees on average, which is a decent shift from what it's maintaining throughout or aiming to maintain throughout the course of the day. So with that, we're looking to further facilitate this drop in temperature in the evening versus kind of fight against it. And I think many of us, I certainly didn't know this, of all these things that we might be doing that might be bringing about the opposite effect in the evening. So I would say one of the more common ones that I see a lot is nighttime eating. So we might shift and see some people practicing intermittent fasting. They skip breakfast. They start eating at lunch or into dinner time, and their window is pushed out. So now they're not even finishing dinner till later. And then they're going to like snacking throughout the course of the evening. So we find that there's a great book called The Circadian Code by Sachin Panda that goes in deeper on this topic if people want to go in more. But it's that this thinking that every time we eat something, it's turning on that digestive process and it signals to the body a cue around what time it is. So, it can be even a strategy for people that are shift workers that they know they want to be up later in the evening, that they'll eat beforehand, before that shift or throughout that shift, to then keep the body kind of active, awake, and it makes it more challenging to fall asleep with that kind of whole digestive process going on. And it also heats up the body. So it's that counter cue. So we're looking to have the opposite effect. So we want to really move meal timing back earlier. Now, people often have said 3 hours before bed. And I've actually found a number of people that even 4 to 5 hours before bed has brought some really favorable shifts to some of their sleep metrics and just overall health metrics when they bring that in. And there's a theory that helps promote lymphatic drainage, which is basically the drainage and the cleansing process of the brain throughout the course of the night in the first stage in deep sleep. And that's the fear is that when we're not consistently going through that process, that could be part of that element that is leading to that degradation of the brain health, that Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia. And because when we're not having this flushing process happen and again, it's glymphatic, not lymphatic so it's with a G. So then it's flushing this fluid to bring out some of that waste product. And if we don't go through that process, there can be kind of this hardening of this amyloid beta plaque that's happening each night. And if the body is having to deal with digestion in that first half of the night, because that's when it's happening, deep sleep happens largely in the first half of the night. If we're dealing with multiple processes, then we're not able to then fully focus on that part. So that's one strategy you can take to even have even richer sleep, is to play with some of that meal timing. Also, I have a lot of clients that are also wearing continuous glucose monitors. So they'll often see improvements in their body's ability to handle glucose when it's earlier on in the evening versus later in the evening, because that whole process acts on a circadian rhythm too. So just leading into that can make a difference there. And of course, the meal type. So we don't want food types that are going to then have a big spike in glucose and then a crash, because when we have the crash, then we're going to want to eat more. And that can also cause more wake ups if we're having a lot of ups and downs throughout the course of the night. So if you are someone listening and you have a lot of wake ups, really looking at your glucose and insulin and how that's functioning and seeing if we can balance some of that can make a difference there. But that's one more of the things that we can add in.
Wow. And there's so many elements to it. So I think just kind of reviewing this here. So we have this bright light idea, again, figuring out what your schedule is. So depending upon, what you're doing in terms of work and so forth, and that ideal schedule, and then leaning into the natural light during the day. So to not only wake you up, and it's interesting because I've had some intuitive things that I would do, like open the shades, right? Things like that as you get up. And I'm thinking about this for my children as well, opening the door and, opening the windows and that sort of thing. But you're saying even more so would be to step outside and really get that natural light and even extend that amount of time to, I guess, cue the body truly, right? That it's time to be up and awake and focused and so forth.
Yes, because that will suppress any remaining melatonin production, shift us over to actually what we want to cultivate, which is the cortisol pulse that we have throughout the course of the day, and with the higher amplitude of that in the early morning hours. So leaning into that as much as possible. And then the flip side of that is that we want the cortisol to be, decreasing in the evening hours. So we want the presence of darkness, the uptick of melatonin there, but in alignment, doing activities that would align with sort of night mode, where we're starting to rev down the engines and all the things that would align with that.
Right. Mellow out.
Mellow out. And productivity is huge in this conversation too, because I work with a lot of people that can have the blessing and the curse of making their own schedule.
Mhm.
So they're very much often not the only people, but often very commonly people that might deal with the difficulty of when are we stopping work? When are we
Yes.
stopping certain things? And then moving into kind of more relaxation, off time, unapologetically, and just sort of, not making ourselves wrong. And that can be a really big part of this ability to see that positive sort of relaxation, even just in our metrics. Like, some people are measuring, we have a lot of clients that wear continuous HRV monitors. So those will be monitoring, like I have one on right now that monitors my HRV, second to second. And if we see patterns where we're starting to get more stress in the evening, that can be a sign that some of the things we're doing might not be facilitating our goals.
Okay. HRV, clarify that, please.
Oh, thank you. Yes. I throw that out there. Like, everyone's talking about heart rate variability. Thank you for having me be responsible for that random acronym. So that one's really powerful because it can really point to our ability to recover second to second, but particularly throughout the course of the night. So seeing if we're tracking, that can be an important metric to see how recovered we are throughout the entire time that we were sleeping and going into the next day. And it can also show if we're having a large load of stress, both mentally, physically, environmentally, a number of things. It's a very kind of complicated metric, and yet can tell us a lot about kind of the state of the quality of our sleep and our health in general.
Yeah, because so often people can say, well, I thought I had a good night's sleep, except I'm not feeling it. Okay, I want to jump back because I have one quick question when you're talking about the distinctions that we have between, the day starts and the bright light and what we want to cue, and then versus, the dark and the evening and the mellowing out. When you mentioned before about temperature and eating, would eating be another cue in terms of starting the day?
Yes. Yeah. Really good point. So that can be a really powerful cue. So in that circadian code, the goal is, so if you want to go closer into that, or there's many studies that will point to that, we're looking to kind of define first bite and last bite. So when the first bite that you take in the morning can kind of turn on the engines of the body and cue, all right, well, I guess we must need energy for something. So it must be, we assume, the start of the day. And so there's kind of some latitude with what might be the start for you. But the thinking is that we're looking to have most of our eating time within sunrise and sunset. And so all of that would have been logical if we're looking back to kind of hunter-gatherer blueprint that, it's likely, there's no refrigerators, we're all living outside. So what would be most likely is that we would have been eating during the sunlight only for the most part, maybe extending a little towards fire, around the fire, but we're still tethered to that rhythm very much so. So we're looking to bring that about as much as possible. And while in the summer months, that might seem kind of doable, in the winter months, that can really be challenging for a lot of people in certain areas where, the sun is setting relatively early. So it's how do we make that happen? How do we have that kind of restricted feeding window at certain periods and bring about more fasting at other periods? So that fasting tends to cue a lowering of body temperature, a calming of the heart rate for most people at certain points throughout that, as long as, electrolytes are all in balance and all those things. So leading into that can be a really great strategy for that kind of calming period in the evening.
Excellent. Okay, now moving into what I just don't want to miss in this entire conversation because it's brought up a lot when we talk about, sleeping well and sleep hygiene and all that. And we talk about screens. And you touched upon this a little bit in terms of our productivity, in terms of prioritizing sleep so that we can then watch the rest of the day when we are active and make the most of that time being productive, not busy. Okay. When we come back around, figuring out when we need to shut off for the night. And that includes screen time. Can you talk to that a little?
Yes, definitely. So the screen time, there can be this double hit in the evenings if we're leaning into screen time, because one, our retina tends to get more sensitive the longer we've been awake. So going into the evening hours, the same light that from the screen that might not have been that big of a deal earlier on in the day can be more impactful and be more kind of aggressive to the eyes in those later periods and can signal more of that alerting awake cycle. So we're aiming to really have the opposite of that. And so, one, from the light perspective, you can it's different things. If you're looking at laptops, you can put on something like Flux or Iris Tech. You can wear blue blockers. If it's just your phone, if it's an Apple, there's hidden features that you can, Google for color filters to bring in a red light. If it's Android, you can bring in Twilight app to bring in red light. So all of that, we're looking to at least cut the light part of it. So that's not excitatory and kind of that dopamine hit that can happen to keep us awake and engaged. But then the other part of it is like, what's the content that we're taking in and how stimulating can all of that be? But particularly stress responses. So if it's stuff like we're actually in our email, we're doing sort of tasks that can bring about a whole slew of emotions and charge, then we're looking to minimize those things, because I have had many clients that if, kind of treading appropriately and can manage this, that a little TV in the evening can be great, can be relaxing if you're choosing the content appropriately. A little, some people have apps on their phones that they're doing gratitude or they're doing some journaling, so it doesn't have to be like this across the board. You have to stop using all your tech like hours and hours in advance, because we do know from sort of that Pandora's box that tech is sort of out a bit. So we don't want to make it some sort of ethical thing. And then people don't get in this conversation because they say, oh, well, I'm not going to stop using my phone 2 or 3 hours beforehand. So I guess I'm not going to pay attention to this. So there's a happy medium there. And then in alignment with that kind of bright light and blue light, the other kind of common things that I see in that vein of sort of these vices is looking at things like alcohol, THC, and then some of this chronopharmacology elements of things. So certain drugs that we might be taking that might be keeping us up or impacting our sleep, even if we think that we might be taking them to improve our sleep. So certain over the counters or what have you. All of these things often show up in our sleep stat results. So it can be another reason why sleep tracking can often be helpful, because we can really start to point to patterns and things that, so you might be able to see on those nights when you're going to the screen usage, those numbers shift. And if you lean into the alcohol or the late night eating, then you can actually start to notice the cause and effect.
Right. So I think we have a bunch of great steps that we can explore, but one of the points that you do keep making, and I think it's so important, is going back to the diagnostic side of it so that we know what's going on. So I think a great place to wrap up would be just some suggestions of where we could go next in terms of finding the right or easiest, maybe diagnostic tools that we could start with.
Sure. Well, I can say right now in 2021, every client that we work with is required to have the Aura Ring, and spelled OURA, no affiliation, just they're a particularly great tracker for sleep specifically. And then there's also other solid ones on the market too. BioStrap is really an interesting one where we can also get blood oxygen readout and can kind of get nuance with the data. Whoop Band is a popular one for particularly my athletes, because the daytime tracking element of things can be helpful for exercise and measurement systems there. Apple Watch has a certain element. There can be pushback around the battery life with that one, but there are some capabilities if you're willing to kind of figure out the battery charging part of things, at least for right now. There's the Garmin, there's Fitbit, There's the Muse headband, there's different things that you can lean into. But right now we have everyone wearing that Aura. Part of the reason I like that one is for women, not just for this, but this is a cool one. People that are menstruating, you can actually measure parts of your cycle or see where you might be falling in parts of your cycle through the temperature side of things. So you can see what part of your cycle you might be in and how that could affect your sleep and your hormones, and then sort of act in alignment with those.
Isn't technology incredible?
Yes, it really is.
Amazing. Okay. I think that's a great place for us to wrap up. I mean, we could go on, but this is a great starting point, focusing on some of these basic things, the light, the dark, what we're consuming in terms of food and in terms of content. And then the diagnostics. I think those are great places to start to find the right way to approach our sleep to make the most of it.
Yes, definitely. Absolutely.
I love that. Okay. Where can we find you to keep this conversation going, to ask questions, to work with you potentially?
Yeah. So sleepisaskill.com acts as the great bucket of all the things. If you go there, you can do a few actions. So one, you can take a sleep assessment, and that will give you targeted feedback about your particular sleep. You can then from there get our newsletter, shared how we do that every single week. And we like that to be a really interactive place. So, you're on there and you see one of the sleep experiments that have going on, or different pieces of news that you can respond back to that and kind of create a conversation piece going there. Then you can also listen to or subscribe for the weekly podcast that comes out for sleep optimization. And then from that place, so lots of free information that you can get to begin. And then if you are looking to up level, we do have both semi-private and private options for 90-day course packages that we run that all require the Oura Ring as of right now.
Excellent. Okay. So how about have a little fun with me now with a rapid wrap up?
Yeah, sure. Perfect.
Awesome. Please fill in the blank. The song that always makes me dance is?
Oh, yes. Anything from the Hamilton soundtrack. I'm obsessed with Hamilton.
Okay. I will go in and randomly pick a good song, and it's going on the Positively Living Podcast Spotify dance playlist, either volume 1 or volume 2 at this point, because we're getting a lot of good songs. How about the quote or mantra I share all the time is?
How you do anything is how you do everything.
That's a good one. And how about you mentioned a couple of great books, which I will already include in the show notes along with your links and everything. But how about a resource book or app that makes my life easier?
Yeah, sure. I would say right now, the Why We Sleep book is particularly popular and very impactful for people to start, really learning more about this area. So that could be a good one to start with.
That's an excellent one. Okay, great. I will add that to the show notes. And last but not least, what or whom are you grateful for today, Mollie?
Oh, love that. Great question. I am grateful for probably my fiance. He is really a great partner in crime. And we both, kind of similar businesses, but in different arenas. So he actually has a background in psychology and forensics and poker player and, spots tells at the table. So he teaches people the skill set of poker and nonverbal. So, throughout the course of the day, we're like nuts, just sharing all of the things that we got going on. And so definitely grateful for him and grateful for this opportunity to be here to, kind of share this topic and for all of your positivity.
Oh, well, I am most certainly grateful for you and all that you have shared today. You have so much wisdom to bring to this topic and to bring to all of us to just live better. So I'm thankful for you, Mollie, and I appreciate you shining your light in this world and sharing it with us today.
Oh, well, thank you. The feeling is mutual. So keep up this platform that you got going. It really makes a difference.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me today. Your time is precious and limited, and I'm honored you chose to spend it with me. If you have feedback, questions, or want to schedule a chat, head to positivelyproductive.com/connect. And if you are looking for any of the resources referenced on the podcast, from books to products to training and more, go to positivelyproductive.com/resources.